Dynasty Trading Room. My name is Drew, and today we're going to be breaking down my top 12 receivers in the 2025 NFL Draft Class for your Dynasty rookie drafts. Be sure to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it. And number one is going to be a guy that's been a pretty heavily debated prospect recently. It's Missouri's Luther Burden. This is a guy that's really fallen out of the first round in a lot of mock drafts recently, which is pretty surprising to me. I know there's been some rumblings of some off-the-field concerns, some character concerns, whatever it may be. But just based off the tape, which is what I do these grades on, Luther Burden has remained the wide receiver one in this class for me for a very long time now. I think the tape really speaks for itself there. This is a guy that I know that there was a production drop-off this past year, but the quarterback play was pretty bad. He got misused in Missouri's offense pretty heavily. But when you watch him get to actually play translatable NFL receiver, on the tape, this is a guy that's really good. He's one of the best separators in this draft class. Has no issues with press at the line of scrimmage. Not the most physical guy in the world, even though he's a little over 200 pounds. Not as physical in his route running, but super physical after the catch. This is a guy that's got good contact balance. He's elusive. He's dangerous with the ball in his hands. The best yak ability in his class, right there with Savion Williams. I think he's a guy that is one of the few receivers in this draft class that has true wide receiver one potential. I think he's been penciled in the slot for a lot of people, but I think he's got a guy with the skill set to play both inside and out. The top end athleticism is a little bit concerning. I don't know that he's necessarily the best top end athlete in the world. But as far as short area quickness and acceleration and burst goes, I mean he's unbelievable. He's so twitchy. He gets up to top speed so fast. I think he separates vertically well enough to play on the outside. I think he's good against man coverage. I think he's good against settling in between gaps in the zone. And I think this is a guy that should not be falling as much as he is recently. And I think he should still be your number one receiver in your mock drafts. And coming in at a very close number two, it's Texas's Matthew Golden. And Matthew Golden is another guy that's really risen up draft boards as the process has gone on towards the end. And I feel like he rises every single time I watch him. Honestly, I think he has a very clear argument for wide receiver one. I flipped back and forth between him and Burden for a while now. They have very similar grades, if not almost identical. I think Matthew Golden's another guy that has wide receiver one potential. I think he's got the versatility to play all three positions, whether that's X, Y, or or X or Z or in the slot. Excuse me. I think this is a guy that has really so well rounded, probably the most well rounded receiver in this draft. Very good athlete. You saw the 4.29 40 at the combine. That shows on tape. I think he's probably a little bit slower than that on tape, but still a very good athlete. Has no issues with press. He's got some of the best releases off the line of scrimmage in this draft class, right there with Kyle Williams. He's a very natural separator. He has no problems against man coverage. He separates, creates a lot of space very easily. Like I said, best release packages in the class. I think he's a lot better at the catch point than people give him credit for. I think he's one of the best trackers of the ball in the air in this draft class. I think he knows how to fight through contact. He uses hands at the top of stems to really fight through contact. He's a good salesman at the top of routes. I think he doesn't really tip off his breaks at all throughout the stem. Like I said, I think he's just a very well-rounded receiver. Not really any weakness to his game. I think this is a guy that probably works best as a Z, but like I said, I think he has versatility to play all three receiver positions. So whatever offense he gets drafted into, I think he'll have a very clear path to starting on day one and having a pretty solid role. Has a pretty good chance to be the first receiver off the board come draft time. And I think there's a very clear argument to be made that he's the first receiver taken in Dynasty rookie mock drafts. I wouldn't hate him over Luther Burden by any means. I think, like I said, he's a very close second, and he'd still be a very high pick in all of your mock drafts. And coming in at number three is Ohio State's Emeka Egbuka. I know there's a lot of prospect fatigue around Egbuka. We've been talking about this guy for over 2 years now at this point, but there's a reason for that. This guy, he's not any less of a prospect than he was for the past 2 years. We've been talking about him. He's still that good. I don't know that I necessarily see a wide receiver one ceiling for this guy. I think he's probably always going to be kind of playing second fiddle, but he's going to be one of the best at that. I think this is a guy that is probably a perennial 900 to 1,000 yard receiver too every year in the league. This is a guy that's so cerebral. He's aced the interview process so far in the NFL draft. From what I know, the NFL is very high on this guy. I think he's a bona fide first round pick come draft time. I think he gets kind of undersold as an athlete. I think probably the athletic ceiling is a little bit limited, but I think he's twitchy enough, more than good enough of an athlete to create separation against man coverage. He's a great route runner. His hands are very good. He has no drop issues. He catches anything that comes within his frame. Like I said, he creates a lot of separation. Doesn't struggle with press man. I think he's probably going to be a slot guy at the end of the day. But I think really in a pinch, if the team that drafts him needs somebody who can play on the outside, I think he can kick out there for a little bit. I don't think he's somebody that can't play outside, but I think he probably lives in the slot in an ideal world. But I think this is a guy that's going to be very, very productive. Probably like a Jordan Addison type. Not that that's a stylistic comp, but probably like a role comp. I think he's going to play a very similar role to somebody like Addison to a Justin Jefferson. A very, very good wide receiver 2 who gets a lot of traffic in an offense, even if he has somebody very good next to him. And I think he's probably the highest floor of anybody in this draft class. And I think he's probably the safest pick in all of your Dynasty rookie drafts. And coming up at number 4 is the first big surprise of this list. And there's going to be a couple as it goes on. I've got a couple hot takes to get off in this video. But the first one is going to be Washington State's Kyle Williams at 4. Kyle Williams is a guy who's gotten a lot of attention recently as well, well-deserved attention. This is a guy who flew under the radar for most of this draft class, or most of this draft cycle. And he's been criminally underrated. I'm glad he's finally getting some of the recognition that he deserves. He is my favorite player in the entire 2025 draft class, bar none. This is a guy that I see a lot of Ladd McConkey from last year. I think he's such a quick, natural separator, the best separator in this class, I have no problem saying. I think he's the best off the line of scrimmage as well, probably the best release package in this class. Press man coverage has just no chance against him. They can't lay a finger on him. He's such a good salesman off the line of scrimmage. His footwork is just some of the best in this class. I think he's a very, very good athlete. There's some current concerns surrounding his size. He's only 5'11", like sub 200. A little bit on the smaller side, but I think he's such a good separator, such an elite separator that it really doesn't matter. He's pretty flimsy at the catch point. He not going to fight through contact. Probably not going to win you a ton of jump balls. Not a big contested catch guy. But like I said, when you separate as well as he does and as consistently as he does, I think that's not really a problem I'm concerned with. I think this is a guy that could play in the slot. People talk about him as a slot receiver. But I think he could work as a great Z. I would play him on the outside first if I were a GM or a coach. And I think he's going to be a guy that comes in and has a day one impact. He's going to get a lot of targets because he gets open so easily. And I think this is a guy that continues to rise up draft boards and should be even higher than he is for a lot of people. And I would have no problems taking him as the 4th receiver off the board. And here at number 5 is the next big surprise, and that's TCU's Savion Williams, who's a guy I've talked about ad nauseum on this channel in all of our mock drafts. Savion Williams is another one of my favorite prospects in this draft class. He has been for a very long time now. And I think he's one of the most misunderstood prospects in this whole draft class. I think they're talking about him as a running back. People see him as just a purely gadget guy. There's a lot of Cordell Patterson comps getting thrown out there. And I think people are really underselling what Savion Williams' skill set can be. I think he would be very good as a gadget guy or as a running back, but I think you're kind of wasting him in that scenario because he has so much separation ability. And I think when he was allowed, the very few times he was allowed to play actual receiver at TCU in that offense, he excelled at it. This is a guy that at 6'4", 220 has unbelievable movement skills. You don't ever see people move the way he does at his size. It really is unbelievable. The after-the-catch ability, I understand why they use him as a gadget guy because he's so dangerous with the ball in his hands, the contact balance, the elusiveness. He's just a home run waiting to happen with the ball in his hands. And I think you're going to see that translate to PPR and fantasy. He's going to be a guy that gets a ton in the screen game. He's going to get used out of the backfield. But as a player, he's such a good separator at his size too. People call him raw and like a boomer bust prospect, but I think he's a far more advanced and developed separator than people give him credit for. He's a very nuanced route runner. He understands leverages. He's a good salesman at the top of routes. I think he sinks his hips well and can stop on a dime for comeback routes and stop routes. I think he's a good downfield separator. He's great in contested catch situations. He flashes his hands late. There's been some drop issues, but I think when you watch how good he is in those contested situations, I think it's pretty clear the drops are a mental issue, like a focus drop issue, and not necessarily related to his hands, his ability to catch the ball at all. And I think he's probably got pretty easily the highest ceiling of any receiver in this draft class. And I think Savion Williams is somebody that should be much, much higher on people's boards and is being criminally underrated in this draft cycle. And coming in at number 6, I know people are probably wondering why I haven't mentioned Arizona's Tetairoa McMillan yet. And that's somebody we've talked about. Me and Steve have debated back and forth with in our mock drafts, and he's going to come in here at number 6. He's not going to fall any further than this for me, which I know people are probably already screaming about that he's much, much too low. And I understand that. I'm probably one of the people that's lowest on him in all of the draft community. But it's not to say he's not a good player, because he's a very, very good player. I just can't quite get with the hype that's around him. And the reason for that is just that I think he's probably going to be more of a slot type receiver. That's what his role should be. I know he's a big body. He looks like an X when you look at his profile. He's got very long arms. He's 6'5". He's 215 or 220 pounds, whatever he is. And he's a great contested catch receiver. He's one of the best I've ever watched when it comes to the catch point. I'm not trying to take away from him there. His catch radius is truly out of this world. And if you get a ball in his catch radius, he's going to catch it. His hands are unbelievably good. My main issues with him, for a guy with his size profile, He should be a lot more physical than he is at the catch point. I think he needs to do a better job of kind of playing basketball at the catch point and using that massive frame to fight through guys and kind of box them out. But like I said, the arm length shows up. The hands are so good. But I think the separation ability is not what you would like for a guy that's getting drafted as high as he is. I think he struggles in man coverage sometimes. My biggest issue is against press man coverage. I think he really, really struggled against that in college. I think he got walled into the sideline far, far too many times against pretty subpar press corners. I'm really concerned about his ability to play on the outside at the NFL level with those kind of boundary press corners. I don't think that his top-end athleticism he's a very, very fluid mover for his size. But when it comes to just straight line top speed, I don't know that he has the long speed to vertically separate against NFL guys as well, NFL boundary guys, that is. So I think he's probably a player that works better as a big slot. And I think that kind of limits his versatility a little bit, which is why I have him a little bit lower. But I still think he's a very, very good player. He's still an early second-round grade for me, just maybe not quite as high as some others in the draft community. And coming up next at number 7 is going to be Iowa State's Jaylin Noel. Jaylin Noel was a guy that I got to a lot later than I should have. We talked about him specifically in our Senior Bowl coverage. He had an awesome Senior Bowl week down in Mobile. And Jaylin Noel was a guy I really wish I'd watched earlier, to be honest. This is one of my favorite players I've watched in this draft class. Jaylin Noel he's just a dog. You know, I hate to be kind of broad in general with that, but there is so much fight in Jaylin Noel. I know there's some size concerns with him as well, being kind of a smaller guy who got stuck in the slot as well. But I think he's such a good athlete. You know, you saw him at the combine. He had that crazy RAS score. He tested out of the gym, but he plays so much bigger than he is. I know there's a lot of size concerns with him as well. But when you watch him at the catch point, this does not look like a guy who's playing at 190 pounds. I mean, he fights better than 99% of the receivers in this draft class. He's relentlessly fights through contact at the catch point. He's going to box people out even with that small frame. He attacks the ball. He's going to come back through defenders to get to the ball. He's a very natural separator. Like I said, awesome athlete. He's a track star. When you watch him, he gets to 0 to 60 in no time flat. He's got the long speed to vertically separate and stretch the field against anybody. I think he's going to go a lot earlier in the draft than people think, and it's very well deserved. This is a guy that's going to come in and play. Another guy who can play, I think he could play outside. He might play slot, depending on how the NFL views him. I think he has the skill set to play outside, but regardless of where he plays, this guy's going to be a complete weapon in his offense. Like I said, such a good separator, such a good athlete, plays way bigger than he is. He's so physical. And I think he's going to be a very, very productive receiver, whether that's in the Z role or as a slot guy. And I think he's somebody that should be getting talked about a lot more than he is. And coming in here at number 8 is going to be Stanford's Elic Ayomanor. Ayomanor's been a guy that I have not talked about enough on this channel. Honestly, I feel like he kind of slips in a lot of the mock drafts. I don't take him as often as I should. And this is a guy that I really, really like. I think in this class, there's a very, very glaring lack of true X-type receivers. A lot of the bigger body guys, I think, translate more to the slot rather than staying outside. But that does not apply to Elic Ayomanor. I think he's a guy that can absolutely stay outside and play that true X receiver role. He's in a very, very big frame, 6'1", 6'2", a little bit over 200 pounds. But he plays even bigger than that. I mean, this is a guy who truly excels at doing that playing basketball I was talking about earlier, where you box guys out, use your frame to really get defenders out of the way and attack the ball in the air. I think Ayomanor does a great job of that. I think he's a very, very good separator at his size. That's pretty rare to see the athleticism and the separation ability that he has while being a bigger body type receiver. I think he's actually one of the better separators in this class in general, much less for just one of the bigger body guys. I'd like to see the hands be a little bit more consistent. He's kind of had some drop issues, kind of in the same vein as Savion Williams, where I don't think it's an ability, like a fundamental inability to catch like some other receivers we've seen. Because I think you see flashes of it. It's not a consistent issue. It just kind of rears its head every now and again. So I'd like to see him be a little bit more consistent at the catch point. But a guy with that size and that separation ability, and he's a weapon after the catch as well because he's such a good athlete. He just really stretches the field. Will be on the outside, doesn't struggle with press man at all, which is another thing that a lot of the bigger body guys kind of struggle with in this class, and Ayomanor does not at all. And I think this is a guy that's going to go a lot earlier than people think as well in the draft, but just because, like I said, the lack of true X receivers, I think he's a guy that can come in on day one and play that role as the outside, true big body guy in an offense, and there's a lot of fantasy value that comes with that. He's going to get a lot of targets. The offense is going to kind of run through him if he goes to a team that really needs that big body X guy on the outside. And I think Ayomanor is going to be a very, very productive year one receiver. And coming in at number 9 is going to be another one of my guys that I talked about a lot on this channel. The second TCU Horned Frog on this list, and that's going to be Jack Bech. Jack Bech is another guy who had an outstanding Senior Bowl, really popped up on a lot of people's radars. I was on him a little bit earlier than that, not to kind of brag on that, but he's a guy that I was really high on early in the process, and now I think consensus has kind of flown past me a little bit. People are talking about him as like an early second rounder, even a borderline first round guy, and I can't quite get with that hype. I think he's just a little bit too limited of an athlete for me to take him in that range. But he's an incredibly well-rounded receiver, got a very, very high floor. I think he's going to come in on day one and be a starting receiver. People have comped him to that Puka Nacua. I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think I see some shades of that. Very, very physical receiver. People kind of body type him as a power slot receiver. I think he's another guy that can stay outside. I don't know if he'll get that opportunity in the NFL, but I think he has the skill set to stay outside. But I think he could also work as a very, very good power slot option. He's another guy that he gets undersold in his separation ability as well. People don't really talk about him as a separator. They talk about him as a catch point, contested catch receiver, which he is very good at. But I think he creates a lot more separation than people think against man coverage. He doesn't struggle at all with press man coverage. He's very, very physical at the line of scrimmage. He hand fights like a boxer against press man. It's really cool to see. And I think when you get to those contested catch situations, which is where he really makes his money, you see that show up. It's kind of deceptive when you look at him. You don't think he's a very, very big guy, but he's 6'2", 215 pounds. He's very, very stocky. And you see that popped up at the catch point. He knows how to box guys out. He knows how to fight through contact. The hands are incredibly strong. He's got vice grips for hands. He doesn't drop everything within his radius that he's coming down with. So I think Jack Bech is a guy that another very, very safe high floor pick. If you just really can't afford to miss on one, Jack Bech is probably your guy. He's going to come in and play, whether that's on the outside like I think he can, or in the power slot role like a lot of people have projected him to. I think he's a guy that can come in and be a day one receiver on an offense. He's probably going to be a second round pick, maybe even top 50. And I think he's going to get a lot of target share wherever he gets drafted to. Coming in at number 10 is another player that probably people have been looking for on this list. He's a little bit lower for me than most, and that's the other Iowa State Cyclone on this list, and that's Jaden Higgins. Jaden Higgins is another player that I have been a little bit lower than consensus on, and I don't want to come across like I dislike him as a player, because I don't at all. All these guys are very, very tight-knit in my grades. There's not a big gap between any of these guys. It's just Jaden Higgins struggles with a lot of the same things Tetairoa McMillan does for me. Another reason I have him a little bit lower. These big body guys that should be very, very physical at the catch point. And I think Jaden Higgins just kind of struggles with that at times. For a guy with as big of a frame as he has at 6'3", 200 plus pounds, he really doesn't fight through contact and fight back to the ball as well as you think he would at that size. And I think he's another guy that kind of projects better to the slot because he had very, very limited reps against press man coverage in college, but the ones he did have were not particularly flattering. I thought he kind of struggled with that. Not very physical off the line of scrimmage. Again, you'd like to see him be a little bit more powerful at that frame. But a guy at that size that is his level of athlete is just so rare to see. There's a reason people talk about this guy as an early second-round pick, and I don't hate that at all. He's an early third-round guy for me, but I totally understand why people have him that high. Truly a special athlete for a guy at 6'3" to move as twitchy as he does and to be able to sink his hips and stop on a dime like he can at that height. And that weight is really rare to see. I think he's a pretty good separator for his size as well, too. I think he's a guy that's got a very, very high ceiling. I just don't know if I see him projecting as an outside guy. And for a guy who's as good of an athlete as he is, too, in the short to intermediate level, I'm not sure he has the deep speed or the long speed to really vertically separate and kind of challenge guys on the outside at the NFL level as well, much like I was talking about with Tetairoa McMillan. But I think this is a guy that could be a very, very productive big slot receiver if he gets to a place that gives him that opportunity. And I think if he does get to play as a big power slot, like we've been talking about with some guys on this list, I think Jaden Higgins has a very, very high ceiling, especially in fantasy, very, very high PPR production potential. And I'd like to see him get to a situation that allows him to play that big slot role. And coming in at number 11 here, our second to last player is probably the most underrated player in this entire receiver class. I've seen nobody talk about him in the fantasy space, and that's Colorado State's Tory Horton. Tory Horton is a guy that's been talked about for a little while now. Probably got a lot of buzz last year about as a prospect, and then he had a bad injury that ended his 2024 season pretty early, so he didn't get a chance to produce the way people would have liked. But when you watch this guy's tape before he got hurt, this is a really special athlete. He tested really well at the combine. He's a big, lanky, big frame receiver, 6'2", very, very long arms. And in that tall, lanky 6'2" frame, this is a guy that's a great athlete as well. I think he stretches the field and separates vertically very, very well in a class full of big guys who don't do that as much as you'd like. I think he's a great athlete. Pretty raw as a route runner. I think he has some more polishing to do in terms of his separation ability, but I think there's flashes of that on his tape. He clearly has the ability, just needs to be coached up a little bit. Very, very good at the catch point. He attacks the ball. He tracks it very, very well. He's a hands catcher. He extends and catches the ball at the catch point. with his hands and fights through contact. He knows how to use his frame to box guys out and get to an advantageous position at the catch point. And I think probably his most underrated ability is his ability against zone coverage. I think probably it's between him and Xavier Restrepo from Miami for the best receiver when it comes to knowing where zones are and knowing where to settle down in those gaps in zone and really be a QB's best friend. I think Tory Horton has a very, very high ceiling in that role. And I think Tory Horton is just a guy that should be getting a lot more talk than he is. Could come in as another guy who's an X receiver in a class that doesn't have very many of those. I think he can play on the outside on day one in that big frame, a lot of athleticism. I think he's a very, very smart player. You just like to see him develop his route running a little bit more, his separation ability get a little bit more advanced. But the building blocks are all there, the tools are all there, and I'd like to see Tory Horton get a lot more coverage than he does. And coming in at my last spot, last but not least, is going to be another Texas Longhorn and Isaiah Bond. And Isaiah Bond's been a very controversial player in this draft cycle because he came into the year as a lot of people's wide receiver one preseason, including mine. He was my wide receiver one at the beginning of this season, and he kind of fell off a cliff in 2024. There were some injury issues. There's been some rumblings of some off the field and character concerns with him. You saw the production completely die out. But in spite of all the issues that have kind of arisen from the 2024 season, there was still some good tape that he put out there. He's still one of the best athletes in this whole class. I know he didn't run the number that he kind of floated out there like a lot of people were talking about. But I think he's still, a Jaylin Waddle-esque level athlete, a guy who can really stretch the field, going to be a straight line burner when he gets in the league. I don't think his 40 time really did him justice when it comes to what you see, the long speed you see on tape. Elite athlete. I think he's a very, very good separator. A lot more than people give him credit for. I know he's become a hot topic to kind of hate on after the bad 2024. But I think he's still a very good separator. The athleticism really, really helps in that. I think he can be a slot receiver. I think he'd be good there. But I think he also has the ability to play outside. Not the most physical or big receiver, but I don't think he struggled all that much with press man coverage. I don't think it was a strong suit of his, but I wouldn't call it a weakness either. Not very, very strong at the catch point. You're not expecting this guy to win you any jump balls. He's not very QB friendly in terms of coming back to the ball and fighting through contact and being aggressive at the catch point. But that's not what you're drafting him to do. I think you're drafting this guy to be like I said, a Jaylin Waddle-esque field stretcher. Be that outside guy that really just is your deep threat and can take the top off defenses from time to time. And I think Isaiah Bond, if he gets in a situation that allows him to play that role, could be a guy that you get really, really late as a sleeper in Dynasty rookie drafts and has the potential to be a pretty productive receiver in his rookie year. And rounding out this list, and I've already hit my top 12, but there's a couple honorable mentions I want to throw out there that probably should have been mentioned that maybe didn't quite crack my top 12, like Miami Xavier Restrepo, who I think is a very, very good receiver. I know he didn't test very well. There's been a lot of conflict around that, but I think he's a great receiver. Ole Miss's Trey Harris, who I'm a little bit lower on than most, probably is in a lot of people's top 12, not quite in mine, but I think he's a very good athlete in that massive 6'3 frame. Just didn't quite have the separation ability to crack my top 12. And Utah State's Jalen Royals, who's very high on a lot of people's receiver rankings. I think he's probably a slot-only guy because he's not the best against physical contact at the line of scrimmage or fighting through contact in his stems, but I think he's an after-the-catch threat. Could be a guy that if he gets in an offense that gives him a lot of design production, gets the ball in his hands early, could be a very, very productive receiver, just right outside my top 12. And also Illinois' Pat Bryant. Pat Bryant's another guy who we talked about from the Senior Bowl, had a very, very good week in Mobile. Another big body, one of the true few X's in this receiver class. Fights through contact well, very, very physical receiver, great at the catch point. Just a little bit too limited of an athlete to crack my top 12. But those are a couple guys I thought deserved to get mentioned on this video, even if they didn't crack my top 12 rankings. But that's going to do it for this receiver rankings. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see more breakdowns from me specifically, you can follow me at Iron City Film on Twitter or X. And I will catch you guys in the next one.